There are two situations when you would consider adding details to a use case diagram. One is to identify a common task and its associated scenarios that is shared between two or more use cases. And second is to record any alternatives or additions to the main success scenario as separate use cases. In both situations, the new tasks are shown as new use cases, and the UML provides a suitable notation, known as a stereotype, to represent the relationship between the original use cases and the new ones. Stereotype, denoted by the angle brackets, is a way of adding detail to any part or element of a model. It is a way of expressing variation or a usage distinction that tells you more about the original element. For example, the line drawn between an actor and a use case indicates that there is an association between them. We could add the stereotype communication to such a line to emphasize the communication that takes place between the two. In practice, this stereotype is left out because it is the only type of association between an actor and a use case. The main disadvantage of this approach is the additional complexity they bring to a model, in contrast to the simple use cases considered previously. For each use case, there may be more than one scenario. You may even find that an existing component can provide part or all of that common or shared behavior. You can record the shared behavior in a new use case and connect it to the use cases that it came from with an open-headed dashed arrow pointing from the original use case to the new one. Think of the new use case as always being included in each of the originals. Hence, the dependency arrow is labeled with the include stereotype. The figure shows some examples from the hotel domain. The include stereotype simply shows that a use case can contain one or more sub-use cases, and that some such sub-use cases can be reused in two or more use cases. If a use case incorporates a scenario that is significantly different from the main success scenario, you may decide to create a new subsidiary use case. There may even be a need to create more than one subsidiary, depending on what happens in different circumstances. The UML allows a number of ways to record the event that triggers the subsidiary use case. In the figure shown, we have used the general-purpose notation for a note to indicate that create new guest is performed when a guest is not already known to the hotel. The figure shows a development of the hotel system use case diagram that identifies two new sub-use cases. Identify guest and create new guest. The Identify Guest sub-use case is part of the Make Reservation use case and is connected to the original Make Reservation use case because it will have to be carried out every time a reservation is made. However, the second new sub-use case, Create New Guest, which is connected to Identify Guest, will not be carried out every time a reservation is made. Therefore, Create New Guest is connected to Identify Guest with an open-headed dashed arrow labeled with the stereotype extend. This is conditional behavior, as it is only performed when the guest is not already known to the hotel. The textual description of new use case should record a description of the corresponding scenario. It should contain the following 2 key points: the condition that triggers the subsidiary use case, that is, the business event, and the places in the main success scenario where the condition is tested. These are called extension points. An include dependency is a generalization relationship denoting the inclusion of the behavior described by another use case. It is the invocation of a use case by another one. You use include dependencies whenever one use case needs the behavior of another. Introducing a new use case that encapsulates similar logic that occurs in several use cases is quite common. On the other hand, an extend dependency is a generalization relationship where an extending use case continues the behavior of a base use case. The extending use case accomplishes this by conceptually inserting additional action sequences into the base use case sequence. This allows an extending use case to continue the activity sequence of a base use case when the appropriate extension point is reached in the base use case and the extension condition is fulfilled. Having decided to model a system in one or more use case models, the most important thing to consider is their intended audience. You need use cases that can be read and understood by the domain experts as well as the team of developers. The domain experts usually come from the customer's area. If you cannot demonstrate the benefits of your proposed system to them, there is little chance of it being acceptable to the customer. All technical projects of any kind are vulnerable to this risk. Your only defense comes from your skills, experience, and professional ability. In the same way, your use case models must be useful to the rest of your team. For example, those who will be testing the new software system must be able to generate their tests from your use cases and the subsequent design artifacts. In terms of the content of each use case diagram, you should avoid the use of the include and extend stereotypes for an audience that is less familiar with the UML than your team members. The simple notation for actors and their associations with use cases has been a factor in their favor. A common problem with use case is deciding the size and scope of each use case. There is no consensus on this issue because of the wide variety of contexts and viewpoints. However, we recommend that a use case should be smaller than a business process. An associated issue is deciding whether or not you have identified appropriate use cases. You should always review your model and ask yourself, do the actors that have been associated with a use case actually gain value from the use case? If the answer is no, omit the use case. A useful technique for identifying appropriate use cases is to determine the life history of the objects in the system. The main problem with use cases, in general, is the risk of straying into a top-down, functional decomposition and away from the object-oriented viewpoint that is embedded within the UML. It is easy to decompose each use case into smaller use cases in your search for reuse through the include stereotype. Indeed, if you are making your project plans according to the use cases that you identify, the urge to find a use case of a size that you can easily estimate is understandable. A good project manager will make some assessment of this risk and review it upon each iteration of the life cycle. There is always the danger that the use case diagram becomes a model of the product rather than a model of the work, with the result that the product simply automates the current work and no attempt is made to identify the best product to help with the work. No single technique can guarantee that you will collect and identify all the user's requirements. So, if you spend too much time modeling use cases, you can become distracted by the process of modeling and lose track of the main aim, which is to capture the functional requirements for a new system. Consequently, you should use more than one technique to produce a requirement specification. In the UML, an activity diagram is used to model the coordination and sequencing of actions in order to achieve a given purpose. It shows which actor is responsible for which activity. The figure shows an example of an activity diagram which is used to show the separate responsibilities of the receptionist and guest actors for the main success scenario for the use case check and guest. The aim of an activity diagram is to record the flow of control from one activity to another within the workflow of each actor and to show the interactions between actors. An activity diagram is divided horizontally by vertical lines, with each vertical strip known as a swim lane, headed by the name of the actor. A swim lane contains the sequence of activities performed by an actor. Each activity is represented by a box with rounded corners containing a brief description of the activity. The transition from one activity to the next is identified by an open-headed arrow, which signifies that one activity has been completed and it is time to move on to the next one. An activity for an actor begins at a solid black circle and finishes with a double circle with a black center. A diamond shape represents a decision and enables you to indicate that a flow can proceed in one of two directions depending on some condition. The condition under which a particular path is taken is written inside square brackets alongside the path. Such a condition is known as a guard. The path is taken only if the guard is true. The thick horizontal lines are known as synchronization bars. These indicate that the activities of the actors must be synchronized. That is, in the topmost bar, the receptionist and guest must both be ready to continue their activities at the same time.